Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and today we're going to discuss stats for 2022, all the books that I really loved and all the books that I didn't really love so much. Alright, so for 2022, my goal was to read 50 books, and I ended up reading 65, which is an insanely large amount of books for me, and I would just contribute reading that much in volume to all the readathon events that went on. The one that Jessie from Bow Ties and Books hosts has a really great readathon event, and then Cindy from With Cindy always has her annual Asian readathon, and then in November, oh what was it? There was a Skoden readathon by Kim from Native Lady Book Warrior, and I really did not think I was gonna read that many books. I'm glad I did, but yeah, this year I'll definitely be reading less. That's really gonna help with like book burnout and just really focusing on analyzing material more than reading so much in volume. Especially in November, I read 10 or 11 books. Something crazy. I read a lot of books in November and I was like holding on. There are some really late nights. So again, I'm glad I read that many books, but it was definitely its own adventure. I'm really happy that I read more nonfiction than fiction. I think I read 62% nonfiction to fiction. And last year in 2021, I read 50-50 of that. So that's definitely improvement. I wasn't really into nonfiction when I was younger. I think I just had this false perception of what nonfiction is or can do, and I don't know. It's like the same thing with classic fiction. Sometimes I have this idea that classics are going to be old and stuffy, and that's just not true. I found that classics are classics for a reason, and same thing for nonfiction. I've really enjoyed like experimental memoirs. That's definitely something that I've come across this past year that I've really loved. In fact, one of my favorite books of the year is a memoir. I have my notes because I don't want to mess up. Oh yeah, in terms of my mood reading, I really like emotional, reflective, dark, funny, adventurous. That's definitely me. It's kind of funny. I definitely like dark material, and I don't think I'm doing it on purpose, but I just definitely like books that have that balance between dark and funny, just because I feel like that's very true to life. So again, I think I just attribute that to a lot of the memoirs I read that were just like so absolutely entertaining. My top 3 most read authors is Brian K. Vaughan, which is a comic, and I was reading about a volume a month of Saga, and it's my favorite comic. It's one of my favorites. It's really up there. So that's why it like took up most of the graph. The second is Anne Rice, and the third is Ekweke Emezi, which I think is an absolute crime. When I was younger, I really loved Anne Rice's work, and I read her work at like a very young age, and I still remember the feelings that her work, specifically the Vampire Chronicles, just like evoked for me. But now going back when I read her books now that I'm older, I just feel like there's so much that went over my head, and there's so much that I actually don't like about the Vampire Chronicles as far as like what she did with the characters, which I'll discuss later. And so Ekweke Emezi is like one of my favorite writers. They write so much work that I can't keep up, and I already scheduled out what I'm going to read for the year, so I don't think I'm going to be reading any of their other work that I haven't read, which is a bit of a bummer, but at some point I want to rectify the fact that I read more Anne Rice than Ekweke Emezi. So yeah, I think that's it for my stats. What else? Oh, yeah. The last one is a genre. So let's see, what are my top 5? Fantasy, LGBTQA, comics, science fiction, and memoir. Yeah, that sounds about right. That was definitely on the money this year. When I was younger, I enjoyed sci-fi more, or I should say, yeah, sci-fi and fantasy more. But as I got older, I think I enjoy even more like investigative pieces. And even this year, I don't think I'm even, for 2023, I'm not even reading that many investigative pieces. But at some point, I think that'll be like a great segment for like a year long theme of just like investigative pieces. So that'll be like a long-term plan down the road. So that's it for my stats, I think. So next, I'm just gonna talk about books that are at my top for 2022. There were so many books that I absolutely loved for 2022. So I decided to pick books that just really move me emotionally rather than talking about them from like a critical standpoint. And so the first book is a romance, and it's The Love Con by Ceresia Glass. Ooh, I almost dropped it. I love this book so much. It was so cute. I'm not even a big fan of romance, and I don't know, I think that the romances out there, they're so tropey, like you could tell what's happening right away when I read the books, and which is the opposite of movies. I love watching like silly romance movies. Something about it is so comforting, and for some reason it just doesn't translate for me to a book narrative. But this one was so cute. It's about oh my gosh, what's her name? Kenya, that cosplays, and she wants to make that like she wants to be taken seriously as a profession. She enters into competition, and it has like a fake dating trope, but also like a best friends to lovers trope. And though I'm not a huge fan of fake dating trope, the way that the author wrote this just works so well. I love the dynamic of their friendship, and I think that's what did it for me. The friendship just overrode the fake dating trope for me. It just worked. And so much of what I love about this book is that it's not about two people in conflict with each other. It's more about them bonding, getting closer, and their relationship developing to a next level, because what the, I guess you could say, like the antagonist isn't one of them to each other. It's more of them getting together and coming against all these other elements in their life, you know, to overcome. And I just don't think I've really seen that too often in a romance in that way, where although I'm loving the romance, but it's almost like teetering on as secondary to the story that's going on. It focuses on Kenya and what she's going through more. And also there's a friendship, another friend of hers that she's really close to. We don't really get to see that character that much, but I left coming away from the book almost wanting another book about that other character and that friendship that we don't really get to see a lot of in this book. And I felt like the author made me feel like I wanted more, but in like a good way, not like anything was necessarily missing. And so yeah, this is why this is one of my my favorites of 2022, and I can't believe I'm saying that about a romance. Let me see. Oh yeah, okay. So the next one is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is a vampire tale, and I don't want to summarize every book. I just want to focus on what I like. So I'll just say that the way that the author wrote the existence of vampires, how they function, is just written in a way I haven't seen done before. For instance, if you go to any book or movie however vampires are is very much, it's set universally, as where in this book, how vampires are, it differs regionally, culturally, continents. There's just so many specific details that the author took on that I thought was really cool. There is a light romance sprinkled in here, and what I loved about this book is that it's definitely secondary, maybe third on the line of the story, and I like that the plot didn't rely on a romantic relationship to solve problems, because sometimes, you know, that happens in books that are science fiction or even fantasy, I'll say, where I'll just say, I don't want to say what, I don't want to like call out books, but there are just certain examples of books where like love is the answer, and it doesn't make me feel mushy and gushy inside. It just feels like an easy way to resolve issues, because sometimes I feel like the writer can't technically, and that's definitely not something that this author does. So I really love this book. I love the characters and just the inventive way that the author explores Mexico City. I just thought that was really, really cool and inventive. So the other one, you know what's funny is I'm making this video and this is going to come out before my December wrap up. So you're hearing about this now. I read Legends and Latte in December, so this is like one of my most recent reads. And this book is so cute. I think this is kind of like one of those hype books on TikTok. I don't have TikTok. I just found out about this book through Instagram, and I just was so captivated by the cover. It is about an orc that decides that they spent their career as being, you know, hired muscle. They want to start a new life. So the typical fantasy series where you would see all those adventures taking place, that's not what this is. So if you pick it up thinking you're gonna get that doesn't happen. This is such just a quintessential cozy read, and I really fell in love with the characters, the friendship, and the overall message of a person reinventing themselves and not judging people for maybe how they're perceived via stereotypes, you know, kind of breaking those walls. And something about that is just, it was a perfect, cozy, sweet read. It kind of reminded me of like a little dash of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you know, where a community comes together. Or like, I don't know if anyone's seen The Big Brunch. It's on HBO Max. I also watched that in December and I loved it. That's like a cooking show, and I felt like it's all of those things, like what you pour your love into, you know. Anyways, so that's why I really love this, and it's just, I haven't read a cozy read where it's more about friendships, getting to know each other, and just like everyday, how do I say this? Everyday life issues. So yeah, that's the only thing I'd say in terms of like how much hype around this book is. If you're expecting some grand adventure, you're not going to get it. That's not what this book is. And it's very sweet, and I absolutely adore it. So the next one, oh yeah. I think I'm stepping away from, I think it's my last fiction book. And that's Calling for a Blanket Dance by Oscar Hokia. I love this book so much. Just the cover alone is so beautiful, and this was floating around Instagram. I think I might have seen the author's Instagram float around. Oh, you know what also? And Kim from Native Lady Book Warrior also posted this, and so that's one of the reasons why I picked it up. I just thought the cover was beautiful. And what I really love about this story is that this is a story that's like a coming of age, so you're getting to know a character's life from beginning to adulthood. But what the author does that I really enjoyed, that I felt was very creative, is you're not experiencing the character's life. Oh my gosh, what's the name of the character? Ever. I should know this already. Ever. From their point of view, you're learning to see them grow up through a periphery, through family members and friends, and how all these people contribute to this person growing up. And it's just a really beautiful way to experience someone's life. And you don't get the Ever's point of view until they become an adult, which I thought was like just a really, I don't have the words, like a really cool choice. I was really fascinated by that choice. And also the author has this way of writing, this particular style. I think it's called regionalism, where it's so specific to the areas that Ever grows up in. And so it's not just about plopping a character into a location. It's about the culture. It's about everyday life. What does that look like? And I just felt like the fact that the author wrote in a way that was like a regional style just made the world so much more real. So I'd say pick this up. All right, the rest of them are nonfiction reads. Let me see. A lot of my reads that I loved are like from November. And so this is Fresh Banana Leaves, Healing Indigenous Landscapes Through Indigenous Science by Jessica Hernandez, PhD. I really love this book because when I read it, it was just so accessible. There are just some very weighty subjects and scientific subjects, and the way that the author writes, she breaks down material in a way that's so easy to comprehend for someone like me that's not in the sciences, but also engaging. And I also don't feel like the author is making me feel like she's dumbing it down for me. She's just writing in a way that's accessible to everyone. And there's Fresh Banana Leaves, talking about the banana plant, and she uses that literally and figuratively throughout the book, and it just evolves really beautifully. And what else can I say about this? I just appreciated how she explained in like a hands-on way how there is this colonial system that's not acknowledging Indigenous science. And what does that look like practically, in practice? What does the author come across and against in those fields? And it was just really, I don't know how else to say it, just really beautifully broken down. And I really enjoyed it. It was very engaging. One other thing I'd have to say is I like that the author included testimonials, because that part of storytelling is just so incredibly important and is proof of what she's saying in the first place. So I'd really think that you'd enjoy this, even if you feel like the subjects of any particular science feels daunting. This is a great place to start. She doesn't make you feel like overwhelmed or anything like that. So let me see. All right, the next book is one that I read months ago. I can't even remember. I think it was earlier in 2022. And it's Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Gran. This may have been another recommendation by Kim from Native Lady Book Warriors, I think. And that's why I picked this up. This is a journalistic piece written by a non-Indigenous author about, I don't want to mess this up, about murders that were going on in Osage. And it's all wrapped up in corruption, greed, over oil money type thing. What goes on is so complex, and it's like reading almost a conspiracy theory, but it's all true. And the way that this author wrote this book, it could be written in so many different ways. But the approach that the author took is something that I really appreciate, because he closes in tightly into one particular family, starts there, is giving these characters that are really like they're real life people, right? It's nonfiction. And then slowly pulls away the lens to tell the bigger stories that are, and more complex stories that surround the community as well as this family. And I appreciated that approach because, yeah, there's just so many other ways that this could have gone, but instead the author writes this nonfiction journalistic piece in such an intimate way. And I think that's important, to not lose sight of the people that are really affected and damaged by what happened. This is also being made into a movie. It's being adapted. I'm trying to think if I should hold my thoughts on this. Although this is like a non-Indigenous person writing a journalistic piece, I respect the way that the author wrote the story, and the adaptation is being done by Martin Scorsese. I guess my concern is who's writing it. I just feel like it would have been nice if this was adapted by Indigenous people, Indigenous community, and I just don't think that's happening with this adaptation. So I just don't want this to turn into something where the lens is taken away from one family and is instead focused on the white people in the story. I hope that makes sense. I guess I'm just concerned in which lens or how the adaptation is going to be done. But instead of me prejudging, I'll just wait till it comes out and then see it and see how I feel about it. So there's that. All right. This is also, it's so hard not to say my favorite because I had so many great reads this year. But one of my favorites is They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. This author is well known for their music and cultural criticism. And I didn't know anything about this author. I definitely don't pay attention to music criticism. So I wouldn't even know to pick this up. I just happened to be at my local bookstore and it was on display, and it was one of those things where I looked at the cover and thought it was like really beautiful, engaging, and made me want to pick it up. I enjoyed this so much that the 5th year anniversary edition just came out. I ended up buying that one. And there's like 3 additional essays with an additional afterforward that I look forward to. So what this author talks about in this book is just essays, and on the back it says that he's a poet, an essayist, and a cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in 2016. And so in this book, this author writes, some of it's just like purely music criticism. Others are a mix of talking about the political climate, social justice, the author being a black man, and what those spaces feel like in terms of concerts, the punk rock scene, when he engages with those spaces and has a conversation about that. And it's just really beautifully written. Also, he talks about songs and who were they really written for, and just so much more. It's so good. This is the one book that I just will recommend to people. This is like the one. And even though this was written about 5 years ago, I still recommend it. I'm just like, this is the book to read. My last one is Saigon. Oh, I forgot. By Phuoc Tran. It says I haven't read this in so long. A misfit's memoir of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in. This is my favorite memoir of the year. The author is, in real life, he's a professor. He has his own tattoo studio. He lives in Maine. And this is talking about his childhood into adulthood. So just growing up and the racism that he faces, but very much like a coming of age, all kind of meshed together. But the way that the author writes this book just makes it incredibly apparent to the reader how much the author really loves literature. And in fact, every chapter is titled after like a classic piece of literature, and the author will use those books as a platform to engage with what he was going through at that period in his life, and use it as like comparative literature to maybe share and create connections about his experiences growing up. And I just thought that was over the moon cool. I love that. I just think any person that's a lover of books will love this, even if they don't like memoirs, just for the pure fact that he references literature to tell his story, but also the author uses music as well to talk about their connections and growing up. And I don't know if I'll ever do this book any justice, because it was just so good and it was just so touching. I listened to the audiobook version as well. This was like a hybrid read, and the author does an incredible job reading his own book. And I do have like some issues with audiobooks in general. Sometimes an author could like, not author, I'm sorry, the reader of an audiobook sometimes like overacts, or like the changing of the voices just like gets me out of the experience. But what I really loved about the author reading this is that he really is just reading this, and I feel that gives room for the reader, the listener, to like breathe in what's actually going on and keep me locked into the story. And I love that. So yeah, this is one of those books. I did a review and I ranted about this book, about how much I loved it, and so it's really lengthy. But if you're interested in a lengthier talk, in-depth discussion about this, I reviewed it, and I think you'd really enjoy that as well. Alright, so now that we've talked about all the books that I enjoyed this year, there are a small amount of books that I really was not fond of. I'm really not like a big fan of like critiquing too harshly, you know. I want to be fair to like the fact that someone wrote these books. But there's a couple that I really did not like. So the first one, I'll just because I have it on hand, is Wolf Doctors by, oh, you know what? I'll say Miss Woods, because this book, I was looking for it and it actually dead names the author. The author is a transgender woman, and I had to use their original name that they were born with just to find their work. So this is a cover. And I really thought I was gonna like this. There is one particular poem, it's a poetry collection called Cities, and I thought that was like a really beautiful way for the author to have a conversation about being transgender. At least that's how I interpreted the material, and how we're all in transition in a way. Unfortunately, for the rest of the work, I didn't really connect with it. I found it a bit boring, and some of the techniques that the author used didn't really work for me, which was such a bummer because it was an author that I'm definitely intrigued with. They have other work that's out there. I think I'm still going to go ahead and pursue reading those. Maybe as time passes I'll feel differently, but this didn't really do it for me. It's a poetry collection. It's very short, so I read through it pretty quickly. I'm, I don't like bashing books, but I'll say that the rest of the books I don't have a physical copy for me because I either borrowed it or I gave them away. I have a local little library, you know, that a neighbor of mine has. So if I don't really like a book, I'll drop it off over there. And two of them were Anne Rice books. The first one was Merrick, and the second one was Blackwood Farm. I did like Blackwood Farm better than Merrick, but those books are kind of interlocked in a way. And so both these books are part of the Vampire Chronicles. So if you've heard of Interview the Vampire, that's the first book of the Vampire Chronicles. And so Merrick is supposed to be about that character, Merrick. But instead, I felt like Merrick was used more as a plot device rather than really telling their story. And David Talbot, who's a character throughout the Vampire Chronicles, in fact, at some point, this fictional character helps to co-write the books. And so the character is just going around and collecting stories of vampires' lives and turning them into books, right? So that's what Merrick is supposed to be in a way. But David Talbot has this like parental quasi-romantic relationship with Merrick that I really didn't like, and at times I felt like David Talbot's character fetishized Merrick, in my opinion, the way that he describes her from a very young age. I just really didn't like it. It really put me off. And I also didn't like how the vampire Louis was portrayed in this. I read like maybe 5 or 6 books, like the first 5 or 6 of the Vampire Chronicles, and there's a whole bunch I haven't read, so I don't know if Louis comes in and out throughout the other books. But I felt like Anne Rice was dumbing down her character in a way, and I didn't like it. I really did not like what she was doing with Louis in that one. I always liked Interview with the Vampire. It's one of the books that really got me into loving reading. And I felt like it's because of his character describing mourning and exploring their mortality, disconnecting, or maybe staying too connected to their religious beliefs in a way, because they're questioning who are they in this world that he's now a part of. And I have come to learn that in real life, Anne Rice wrote the character of Louis, and then after that didn't want anything to do with them, didn't like that character. So I always felt like, I understand that she didn't like the character moving forward, but she could have easily, like, it's her character. She could have changed the character. The character could have evolved much like the author did, but she chose to, I feel like, pigeonhole that character. And I think her distaste for the character comes through so much. And I think that's like an injustice to the character, basically. And Blackwood Farm, I listened to it. I enjoyed it more than Merrick. And I don't want to spoil anything in that book, but they're just, once again, there are like certain characters that are used more like plot devices that really bothered me. It just like killed the rest of the book. Instead of being able to enjoy it, I just, yeah, I think there's something that happens in the book that altered my perception of what I had just read, and it ruined the experience for me. So those are 2 books I really did not like. Oh, really briefly, because I totally forgot to look the synopsis up, but I read The Rebel Nun really early, like between February and March of 2022. It's a nonfiction telling, oh, how should I say this? It is fiction, but it's based on historical events. And The Rebel Nun itself, just the title sounded really engaging. It was just the story, even the plot itself, if you look up the synopsis, Experience the book didn't even do justice to the synopsis. I found it very slow and not in a good way. There are plenty of books that are slow paced that I've enjoyed because I felt like the way that the narrative was unfolding was justifying the slow pace. And I just felt like that book in particular could have been cut in half. You know, there could have been like a one paragraph between segments kind of setting up what was going to happen next, and the book would have worked so much better. It would have flowed well. And yeah, so it was a bit of a bummer. And the last book that I didn't like, I read recently, and that's How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days. That was a book that I thought would be a really funny, like a rom-com type thing. And I think I had already pictured in my head what the narrative could be. I thought it would be really funny if it was maybe more like an homage to all the actors' work. So really kind of creating a fictional persona. But instead this book is, how do I say this? This book is about a woman that is a fan. So she loves Keanu Reeves from afar, finds out he's getting married, and then it just triggers something for her, like an emotion. She gets very like shaky because she's so upset that this person she doesn't even know is gonna get married. And instead of me enjoying this book, I just found the character disturbing, and I didn't give it a chance. I read 10 chapters in and I couldn't go anymore because she's not only just like reacting in a very like negative, unhealthy way to someone that she doesn't even know, but she's not very nice. Actually, I would go so far as to say she's like disrespectful to like the friends that actually care about her. Again, I only got 10 chapters in. There's like this narrative switch. I think it was like the last chapter I read, and that's like the character's best friend who's a male. So I'm assuming it's supposed to be like a friends to lovers trope or something. But I just couldn't get into it. I didn't like the character. And that was such a bummer because I don't necessarily need to like a character. There's plenty of books I've read where the character's unlikable, and I've enjoyed the book anyways, right? Because there's a character and a story arc that's going to take place. But there's something that I'll compliment the author and just say that the character she wrote felt very, very real, but like not in a good way, you know? And I just didn't give it much of a chance. I couldn't go any further, especially when the character started like shaking and getting upset about just hearing about someone she doesn't know getting married. I just thought it was creepy. So yeah, that's kind of where I was at with the book. So that's the last of the books that I didn't enjoy. But you know what? This whole year was filled with so many good books. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to tackle this segment because I would just end up talking about, what, 60 of the books? 55 of the books? Because they were all so good. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you felt different about any of the books that I didn't like or liked, let me know. I'm definitely willing to at some point give a chance to, not the Anne Rice books, I'm gonna feel that way for a very, very long time, but maybe sometime in the future I'll go back and read How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days, because maybe I'll feel different. But yeah, right now it just didn't work for me. And yeah, anyways, I'll draw this to an end and just say, if you're watching, thank you. Like and subscribe, comment below, and I hope you have a lovely day. So I'll see you later.